Russia does not want to be surrounded. It does not want NATO present. It does not want security guarantees like Article 5. It does not want Western troops on the ground. It wants Ukraine, at a minimum, to be a neutral buffer zone.
So Jeffrey Sachs recently joined Breaking Points to talk about why we're still far from peace in Ukraine, despite the recent meetings between Trump and Putin and another meeting between Trump and Putin and European leaders. He gets into the remaining hangups and the issues at the heart of this, which aren't being dealt with, and even the red herrings that are being discussed that show that we're still far from peace. So let's get his take on this. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel.
First, we want your reaction to what that would mean to the overall situation and Trump's rhetoric here and what it could potentially mean for any sort of peace deal.
Well, I don't believe we've just had 11 years of war and that the war is about to stop because the United States or Europe says they're going to have troops on the ground or Article 5-like agreements. This whole war started because the United States was pushing NATO to surround Russia and as far eastward as they could get. So I don't think that the Russian side is going to say, sure, whatever you like. What we saw yesterday was I wouldn't say a master class, but it was a class in ambiguity on everything. Nothing was clear. Nothing was very truthful. Nothing was settled. But there is a general recognition that Ukraine is losing on the battlefield, a general fact that the United States political scene is not going to continue any large-scale war, proxy or otherwise, with Russia, and so that something should be done to end this. But the specifics are as vague as can be, and deliberately so, and Trump thinks that the way to make deals is to prevaricate, to make things vague, to keep things behind the scenes, to pull each person in as his buddy to say yes to everything in an oblique way. But it's not going to end with the Article 5-like guarantees. In my view, the Russians have been fighting against that basically for more than 30 years. They've been in a hot war over it for 11 years because this war started in February 2014 when the United States conspired in a coup to overthrow a neutralist government.
Yeah, he's totally right about that. It is worthy of consideration, the fact that they're talking about security guarantees and offering Ukraine a security guarantee, which would essentially be a commitment to defend it if it were invaded in the future after a potential peace. But Putin's not going to allow for this. The whole war is over whether Ukraine sides with the West in NATO or not. And when you come up with an agreement that might involve the same exact parties, including the United States, Britain, France, Germany, etc., and just not call it NATO and make it kind of an Article 5 NATO security guarantee anyway, he's going to see through that. He's going to know that that's the same thing. It's just NATO in every way but name. That won't be acceptable. Another thing he said I think is totally right here is that there does seem to be a more general willingness to embrace this idea that Ukraine isn't just losing but has lost on the battlefield, as 20% of its territory is occupied by Russia, something like 85 to 90% of the Donbass. And I just sure wish that recognition would have happened 3 years ago, but they called us all conspiracy theorists for saying that was going to happen, right? Russia was on the cusp of losing and running out of ammunition and all the propaganda they talked about. They told us we were Russian agents for that, but there does seem to be that recognition that is more apparent now in the political establishment than it was before.
And the Russians aren't going to just say, yeah, Trump, you're our buddy. You put troops if you want. I don't believe it. I think it would also be a terrible idea if the United States had troops in Ukraine.
Yeah. Well, and to your point, you could put A4 up on the screen, guys. Kremlin negatively reacting to that proposal of Article 5, like security guarantees. Certainly no surprise there. Just zooming out a bit, Professor, I'd just love to get your thoughts on what are the core sticking points for the Russians, what would be a deal that they would be interested in? What sort of conditions would the U.S., the Ukrainians, the Europeans, the West broadly have to meet in order to conclude some sort of a grand peace deal and bring this war to a close?
We have to understand where the war came from and therefore how it can end. The war started with the continuation of the Cold War after 1991. People thought there was peace, but the CIA, the military-industrial complex, continued the effort to weaken Russia. Brzezinski talked about Russia falling into three pieces in a 1997 article, saying that maybe there'll be a loose confederation of a European Russia, a Siberian Russia, Far East Russia. But the U.S. design was that Russia should finally basically be crushed, that the Cold War was with the Soviet Union, but we're not over yet. We're dominant. We won. And on that basis, Clinton began NATO enlargement. I say Clinton because basically every president then did the bidding of the military-industrial complex. Clinton, Bush, Obama, Trump won, Biden. And maybe this is going to end this crazy misadventure, but this has been 30 years of trying to push NATO to Ukraine and to Georgia, by the way, in the South Caucasus, where the U.S. meddling continues to this day.
Yeah, absolutely right there. For 30 plus years, the different waves of NATO expansion, eventually culminating in the overthrow of the Yanukovych government in 2014, installing a new government that was bellicose toward Russia. In Trump's first term, he withdrew from the INF treaty, which banned a certain class of ballistic missiles. There were all sorts of other provocations that the U.S. did and was responsible for, but he's right. All the presidents were complicit with this. The Obama administration was, the Bush administration was, when it arranged the Bucharest summit and said, hey, we don't care about what Russia thinks, despite what our own ambassador at the time, William Burns, was saying. We're going to include Ukraine and Georgia in NATO, and such led to this catastrophe to begin with.
The idea is Russia's a big country, and therefore it should be a weak country, according to the U.S. Strategic doctrine. Okay, we overthrew a government in February 2014, installed a pro-NATO regime. Russia immediately took back Crimea at that moment because the post-coup government in Ukraine said, okay, we want Russia out of its Black Fleet naval base in Crimea. That's a naval base that Catherine the Great established in 1783 and that has been core to Russia's national security and power since 1783.
They also attacked the Donbass, the regions that wanted to be a part of Russia, in the aftermath of this coup, which clearly changed the government to the detriment of the people's desires. If democracy is your thing, this is the most anti-democratic maneuver on the part of the US and the CIA and the State Department ever. You had those regions wanting to join Russia, and the proper government, proper I say loosely because it was illegitimate, attacking the Donbass. That's what led to the Minsk Accords, which was supposed to settle this conflict peacefully. But the United States and Ukraine and the European powers didn't go along with it because it would have had to grant those Donbass provinces, the oblasts there, autonomy, not dissimilar from the type of autonomy that historically Hong Kong enjoyed, but they didn't do that.
The United States and let's say the deep state said, we want Russia out of there. That was the same idea of the British and the French in 1853 of trying to get Russia out of Crimea in the Crimean War. Okay, enough history. The basic point is Russia does not want to be surrounded. It does not want NATO present. It does not want security guarantees like Article 5. It does not want Western troops on the ground. It wants Ukraine, at a minimum, to be a neutral buffer zone between the United States and its proxies and allies and Russia. That's the bottom line. So, starting point, no NATO. Similarly, nothing that's NATO-like or NATO light. of French and British troops and German troops, and that's what the whole war has been about.
Right.
Second, Crimea is never going back. This is absolutely clear. This was a gambit. This was a ploy of NATO to grab Crimea, and the whole idea, which Brzezinski spelled out in 1997, was if we can basically get Ukraine and push Russia out of the Black Sea, then Russia has no power in the Middle East. It has no power in the Eastern Mediterranean. And that was part of the strategy. So Crimea staying.
You said earlier.
Yeah, absolutely. This is the typical Russia ass, and if you don't agree with Sachs on those things, just look back into history. Look at the documented draft of the Istanbul Accords, the agreement that Zelensky turned down weeks into the war because Boris Johnson and the Biden regime talked him out of it, talked him down this primrose, stupid path to hell and death and destruction in Ukraine. And look at the draft treaty he sent to NATO. It spelled out these things clearly. The Russian position hasn't changed. So for everyone that says, it's just a conspiracy theory, he didn't care about Ukraine and NATO, that is wrong. He categorically cared about that above anything. Ukraine can't be part of NATO. They can't be part of a military alliance that would be NATO all but in name, which is being talked about right now. That's doomed to go nowhere if you have peace aspirations with Russia to even talk about that right now. It's demilitarization, removing NATO resources and assets and the flow of U.S. weaponry and intelligence into Ukraine, and it's denazification. That's something that's not brought up a lot too, but they want not the Nazi contingents, including the Azov regiment, which is part of Ukraine proper's army, to be eliminated. There is a lot of right-wing nationalism, Nazism, that's influencing Ukraine's government, and I actually believe that Zelensky views that as a bigger threat than Putin right now. He is worried that getting into any agreement, which, sacrifices any territory in his mind, which is inevitable at this point, not just Crimea, but the 4 oblasts that Putin generally occupies for the most part, would get him in trouble with those right-wing forces.
It seems like the Ukrainian people are exhausted, want to bring this war to a close. It's not clear that their president is on board with that. What do you make of his role and his positioning and what he wants to see going forward?
First, it's important to understand that there is martial law in Ukraine. We watched the videos also of people being forcibly knocked off their bicycles or dragged off the street to the front line to their death. And Zelensky is ruling over a military regime, not a democracy. His democratic term of office expired years ago. And he continues to rule by martial law, basically by decree. So I don't give any legitimacy to his statements as reflecting the will of the Ukrainian people. This is a starting point. I've never really admired what he's done, because rather than signing a peace agreement that he had in front of him in April 2022 that would have ended this war on far better terms than anything that's going to happen now, he let the United States talk him out of that. Maybe he's a mere puppet anyway, but instead of signing an agreement that was on the table on April 15th, 2022 in the so-called Istanbul process, he walked away from a peace agreement. Since then has lost massive territory and probably 1 million Ukrainian dead. So I'm no fan, I have to say. I'm no admirer. I'm no believer that this is defending Ukrainian democracy. There is no democracy.
Yeah, that is the truth. It is martial law. Actually, Ukraine just extended martial law for the umpteenth time, less than 2 weeks ago, I believe on August 6th. And martial law has been declared there since the early days of this war. I shouldn't even say of this war, because I too believe that the war began in 2014. That's kind of undeniable. Putin invaded in the 7th year of what was a civil war. They tried to have the Minsk Accords settle that, but it wasn't enforced, and that's why Putin invaded, as was Ukraine's status in NATO continued to be floated. And, he does rule with an iron fist. He rules with martial law, banning political opposition, shutting down adversarial media agents and institutions. He has expanded the conscription laws. He shut down Eastern Orthodox churches. And they all say we're there for democracy. The U.S. needs to pump in money for democracy, pump in weapons for this mystical democracy that doesn't exist in Ukraine because, in fact, this is an illegitimate regime. It is the child of the regime installed by the U.S. overthrow. And this wasn't just an organic uprising within Ukraine. That's how they try to sell it. But we know U.S. aid pumped in money to Ukraine to keep those rock concerts going in 2014 in the coldest months of the Ukrainian winter to inspire people to take these stances. We have leaked audio conversations with Victoria Nuland and Jeffrey Sachs talking about who would be part of this provisional government. They were in on this from the jump. We know that's the case. And now Zelensky's talking about security guarantees. And for Trump to even entertain this is indicative to me that peace is a long way away. I think Sachs is right about that part, because if you're talking about security guarantees, we already know from Russia's government, they won't find that acceptable. Sachs is right. This has to be a buffer zone to them, and they're in the driver's seat with almost all the leverage right now. Trump can act however he wants, threatening sanctions and secondary tariffs, but the point is he doesn't have that much leverage. What he said to Zelensky was true a few months back when he said, you don't have any cards, but Trump doesn't have many cards either. And all the money flowing into Ukraine, the threats of sanctions and tariffs haven't changed the conditions on the battlefield one iota. But guess what would? Withdrawing from Ukraine. So if I was Trump and I really wanted to end this war and I really was America first, other than trying to, secure a peace and become a hero without being willing to give up anything, what I would do is negotiate the best deal that I could, put it on Zelensky's desk, say, hey, here's your deal. I did my best. You can take this or leave it. But if you leave it, we're not financing you anymore. We're withdrawing everything. And if Trump gives Zelensky a veto over any peace deal and continues to fund Ukraine, it's a total betrayal of what he campaigned on, ending this war. I think he knows that. I think he knows that a security guarantee would poison the well with Russia and guarantee that any peace agreement would be a dead letter. But what do you think? Let me know down below. Are we close to a peace agreement? Do you agree with Jeffrey Sachs? What is it going to take to end this war, at least the U.S. involvement in it? Let me know down below in the comments. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, subscribe to Breaking Points also. I really appreciate their coverage of this. And until I see you guys next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, no more empire. Peace out, guys. Catch you in the next one. Also consider becoming a YouTube member by clicking the join button below, and I'll give you access to all my videos before they go live on YouTube. Take it easy, guys. Have a good one.